Hey guys, I addressed a little bit of what Mike Broadwell had said on a post here before I started recording, but as I started to read the second thing, I'll start to record here. As I asked questions to see what kind of pain I was trying to overcome with more pain, I realized I have always had a background belief that life was rigged against me. Excellent. Yeah, you see? You see, these are and I'm going to be more explicit. I have a bunch of clarifications I can do today that'll help with last time as well. But this is our real bottlenecks have to do with this sort of thinking, right? Including having our goals. Like the way that I think strategically is I try to identify what the real bottlenecks are rather than just what it like seems, that I need or what's important. And the stuff we're talking about in rigging the game is my best understanding at this point of where our real bottlenecks are. Of course, I also believe in giving you recipes and direct teaching and stuff. As I said, that's how I organized OMG, so other people could do that. And then Mike went on to write, I could see this vague group of people whom I had to please or appeal to by feeling pain so they wouldn't screw me over as bad. Yeah, I was thinking about that today. I went through this in one of the early alchemies, and as an example, as both something that's kind of important or useful or interesting in and of itself, but also as an illustration of the tracing implications and kind of pulling on threads logically, and kind of seeing and thinking in a certain way. And I pointed out how horrible it is, weirdly enough, to like teach kids, let's say, that you don't want that morality is about not hurting other people, right? As opposed to property rights, because the surprising thing is, and I'm only talking about things like this so we understand and do better in the future. I never am trying to shame myself or anybody else about what we've done in the past, right? We already understand that we didn't get everything right in the past. Everything's not perfect already, and so we're trying to get things right, right? Anyhow, the trouble is when we teach kids or adults that what's wrong is hurting other people, then first of all, there's a bunch of bad things, but two of the quick ones are that it's like nothing was bad if someone didn't get hurt. And then there's an inverse, converse, and contrapositive, but I'll bypass that for now and not even think about it, but just say that the brain, rightly or wrongly, then concludes that you need to be hurt in order for someone to have wronged you, right? So we need to find a way to be hurt by being violated, having our property violated. But you don't have to be hurt, right? It's just when property rights are violated, it just invalidates everything. And it invalidates the basic idea of property, right? If someone else can decide what property of yours that you get to keep, then you don't own property, right? The minute you register for the Selective Service when you're 18 is very humiliating for me because I understood the ripple effect consequences. Now, I don't mean that one has to feel bad or be humiliated, but I hadn't figured that out yet. But still, it means that my body belongs to the government, not me, because they can take it whenever they want, right? Even if they don't actually take control over it, specifically and order me around day by day or tell me when I can blink my eyelids or whatever, then the fact that I've signed for the Selective Service for a potential draft reinforces this idea that, well, they get to take it whenever they want, right? So if someone or a bunch of people, right, democracy is literally a subset of tyranny. There's no such unless you're voting in gray areas. But the minute there's any democracy relating to property rights, we should say, right, then you're violating property rights. Like if other people can just vote, even if it's everyone on Earth, if everyone on Earth but me could vote on whether I get to have my body or property, that'll stipulate as whatever my actual property is. If people can vote on it, then I don't own it. Does that make sense? I don't, in a certain sense, or a certain very important sense, I don't own it. So they're establishing dominion over my property, which means that you don't have property. If there's no such thing as property at the point where other people can just have arbitrary thoughts and take it away from you, right? So when we see things that way, then, and I use this as an example of arbitrary, I talk about property rights for at least two main reasons. One is as a fascinating example that'll take us outside show us as an example of navigating outside of standards and norms, which will be part of what I'll talk about today. And the other is to get rid of the massive baggage of all this morality that comes with various cultural stuff to shame us, make us feel guilty, and manipulate us in all sorts of ways, right? So there's so much extra baggage of so-called morality that isn't morality, it's just arbitrary. Once you boil things down to individual property rights, and then separately love, right, caring about other people, then in those two things, you've taken care of all of morality and you can get rid of all the rest of the baggage that absolutely gets in people's way when they're trying to have relationships, earn money, and whatever else is part of building your life, right? But money and relationships tend to be the big ones. And it's very practically that's a huge bottleneck for people, right? And just as just spending all this time with just family stuff all over the place. You can spend good quality time with your family, but you're not going to break through with money if you're like the way a lot of people are, where they're just dominated by it all the time. Or it's going to be tough. It's going to really be like trying to carry something uphill. Okay, so, but Mike was saying, right, like, and I've fallen into this trap myself, absolutely, and I was thinking through it again today, how this idea that what's immoral is hurting others, right, is that's wrong. It's immoral regardless of whether you hurt somebody. If you violate their property, then it's wrong. I don't have to find a way to be hurt if someone points a gun at me and takes $1,000 from me. If I manage to live my life happily after that, that doesn't mean that it was okay for them to do that, right? If someone manages to overcome a rape or other kind of assault and not let it make them feel unhappy, they shouldn't have to feel unhappy just for us to understand that we don't want to do that, right? So, because the opposite of individual property rights is there is literally no property, right? You can't just own some of your own property. You either own your own property entirely, or you don't, right? Because as soon as it's some, then who gets to decide, right? If that makes sense, right? Whatever the part that you get to decide about without someone taking it away from you morally, then that's all of your property. So we're back to all or none. So individual property rights is very much an all or none thing. Except for gray areas and simple things like crossing someone's yard or something like that. It doesn't mean you shoot them or something like that. But it's still their property, right? You can't appropriate someone else's property just because you feel certain about it. Let's see here. But that's big. So the hurt thing is helpful for a lot of people, and also just a lot of us hold on to that, including I've seen myself do it even fairly recently, where it's like you need to feel and express hurt in order to affect the norms, right, of people and get in and explain why something is so wrong. But you shouldn't have to, and it's detrimental. And another thing with the hurt is that people can just get offended. They can just make up being hurt. Not make it. I don't mean they pretend. They actually will feel it. But someone can get hurt, and then because someone can be hurt, blame it on you, but it doesn't mean you necessarily did anything wrong, right? Violating individual property rights is what's wrong. That nails morality, other than love. Period. You don't need any other thing, and so you get this revealed, great, specific, clear boundary, and the more you get, and about something that affects our life on so many levels, and so it's like this solvent, this like almost universal solvent that removes so much complexity from our lives, and that's important because when people start out trying to think about stuff contextually, like we do in Ringing the Game, there's so much to think about, and there's so much wrong stuff and confusion that we need to keep chipping away at it. And the individual property rights thing versus hurt and so forth is something that chips away at a lot of the confusion. And it's intimately related to issues of motivation, goals, because the idea of what's good is related to your goals, related to goal achievement, and all sorts of stuff. So you both kind of cause people to be hurt when they just to convince people that they were wronged, and then you also make people feel like they're not violating when they are, just because if someone didn't get hurt. So it's actually really ideologically wrong. I don't mean that it's like morally wrong in the sense of, again, you should feel ashamed or something, but it really you miss the mark if you teach people not to hurt others. You want to teach them, again, specifically about the individual property rights violations. Because another way to put it is, to hurt someone else, it's partly based on their own mind, right? They have to have incorrect things in their own mind, which we all have, right? Even I have things that, if extreme enough, people can hurt me. But I try to get rid of those things, but still. So you're giving up half the control, or it basically doesn't overlap in two different ways. This idea of hurt versus individual property rights. Someone can be hurt without being actually violated, or they can be violated but not be hurt. So the overlap is close in a lot of cases, but not exact. And plus, it actually encourages the wrong type of overlap as well. So it kind of makes things worse just by believing in it. I then realized, and just finishing up what Mike wrote, I then realized that the particular pain I've been going through over a relationship break with someone very important to me is because I've seen her as being on my side as opposed to this vague group arrayed against me. Incredible what a hold our minds can gain with these twists. Awesome, exactly. So you pulled on a thread. You saw how one wrong idea was potentiating or making stronger another, or making possible other bad ideas. Exactly, right. One thing that can help as another bit of a universal solvent is people are not the enemy. Once in a while, you might catch me in shorthand speaking that way, but like using words that could be interpreted that way, including by myself. But people are never the enemy, right? The ideas that are incorrect, that are inherently contradictory, that lead to violations of individual property rights, or ideas that lead to the suppression of the capacity and the actualization of loving and caring for other people, right? One of the other problems with taxation, besides the violation of property rights, is that it actually removes all that. If they take 40% of your money, that's 40% that can't go towards the same type of thing, like but by choice, right? You remove the choice, like if I don't think of taxes as actually going to help anybody, but if somehow a tiny bit of it went over to someone that needed it, or that in some way, that might be someone you chose to give charity to, right? And if you give charity, then there's love that both you and the recipient benefit from, and it's real. Love is kind of the whole point of all the suffering, is because when we don't use our free will properly, but it got it to make things possible in this way, where we have this free will, and then that allows us to love. But when you take even the possibility of love out of it by pointing a gun at one person, ripping their money away, and handing it to someone else, then you remove the love, and so it's another indication of things. Anyhow, bad ideas are the issue. We want to have compassion for, and even when I speak very much outside of our norms when it comes to things related to, say, government, that I'm doing it to kind of shake people loose, not to demonize them. I'm demonizing the real demons are the ideas, right? But we want to rescue the people from them, ideally. Okay, so check here quickly, and then I'll do a little bit of what I was going to cover to start with. Hey, what's going on, Mike? Building is the path. Good. Hey, all. Hey, guys. Oh, wow. Thanks, Kevin. Nice little plug here. Oh, thanks. I'm glad, Megan, that you like the Understanding Property Rights. Kevin said that. Sorry, just move this here to scroll. Hi, David. I just wanted to say thank you. After Stephen Floyd's introductory webinar where he said to go through law of implication before anything else, that's my training for anyone new, I stopped and went through all of your videos in law of implication 2013. I've listened to your success framework video probably 10 times. That's awesome. Is that the first one with the where I first talk about the results formula shortcut, Kevin? Before doing this, I struggled with putting in an hour a day into OMG. It felt like my brain was overloaded for my day job. Once I've stopped measuring success, or you might mean the one in the orientation section. Once I stopped measuring success by results, oh yeah, that's what you're talking about, not the results formula shortcut in this case, but when I talk about the understanding line and how to measure progress, and I'm going to give more angles on that today. Or things relevant to that. Once I stopped measuring success by results, and this is such a huge secret. This is really why 15 or 20 years ago I said to Mike, pick anything. Once I really internalized this idea that you could measure progress by understanding, including it can keep you from ever getting stuck. So by understanding about understanding, you can both be measuring progress correctly so that you're not going in the wrong direction or a pointless direction when you think that you're making progress, which happens a lot to people. Plus, you're never stuck when you understand it properly. So you can accomplish anything that is at all within any kind of possibility by just with this one idea. And that's why mostly I'm just explaining ripple effects and angles and ways to understand this one idea better and better with everything I teach. Because again, once I got it, then I was like, wow, that's nuts. Just pick anything and we can crush it, and we have. Once I stopped measuring success by results versus gaining understanding, right? So we switched over to gaining understanding. I've been able to keep increasing my amount of time focused on OMG learning by 4 to 5 times as many hours per week. Excellent. I find myself waking up at 4 to 5 a.m. and start working before going to work, spending some of lunch break on it, then getting home and spending more time. I used to get sick very easily by trying to focus like that, probably because I was trying to force it, versus wanting to do it because the life after the goal is obtained, the ideal, right, is so motivating. It's been a kind of weird, amazing place to get to. Well, that's excellent. Great. Now you know why I do this. And what I'm talking about, even when I sound like I'm talking crazy or off topic or something. Because one thing you can spot is that everything I talk about is an angle on what Kevin's talking about here. Everything, no matter what I seem to be talking about, it's always about this one topic. Cruz, Michael Rodriguez, so taxation is a violation of property rights. Yes, taxation is literally another name for extortion. It's like if you rename rape into, whatever random name, First Night, right, in Braveheart. But taxation is literally extortion, right? Like going to your neighbor with a gun and then taking money they worked for years to pay for their wife's cancer treatment. Let's say they took on 3 jobs, their wife got diagnosed with cancer, and they're trying to pay for the treatment. You go over there with a gun, and you say, I'm going to shoot you tomorrow in the kneecaps if you don't give me half your money or all of it that you've accumulated. That's called extortion, right? You're threatening harm in order to take someone's property. The only way out would be if government had some kind of moral magic wand that could take something that is wrong and make it right. And it turns out that it doesn't, that people all believe and act as if it does, but that's one big example of arbitrary, where if you pull on the thread, there's nothing there. There's nothing that happened in history, or there's no idea that all of a sudden magically makes something that's wrong into something that's right just because someone identifies themselves as a member of government. That's my quick summation on that. So hello, Dave, all the best. And then, and then the ripple effect of taxation being a violation like arson or rape or anything like that, the ripple effect of that is crazy because it's so normalized in our society, and there's so many people participating in it and supporting it. And if you think of them all like rapists or child molesters in a serial, ongoing way, the logical ripple effects are shocking. And it forces us out of other things, which is why we have to realize that people are not the enemy. Because when so many people are doing something so horrific, then you need to start to revamp other things that you see about life, and so forth. If you're talking crazy, then I must be hearing crazy good things. I appreciate that, Joseph. Francisco Rowe just got back driving from Miami and rehearing Alchemy all the way. Awesome. I appreciate that. My hero said, I think at one point you were saying that you only need to be at 100% on days that require them and can remain 70% on the days that don't. How do you know what pace you have to maintain to hit a goal? Now, sometimes when I say things like that, I stand by that. It's a little bit of a shorthand. Sometimes I kind of give you some any kind of model. Typically, is just like a rule of thumb where, when in doubt, you can use something like that. And so if you think of it in terms of investing money, then if you have all of your money invested, and let's not even say with stocks, let's say that you have your own business. If you have all of your money or all of your time even committed to stuff just because you think it'll make you money, then if something really good comes along, you can't really take advantage of it because you're too overcommitted with either money. Oh, I appreciate that, Chris. Excellent. They said amazing summary for the tax thing. So I guess I've gotten good at explaining it quickly. It's on my mind a bunch. Um, anyway, because the ripple effects are crazy. Normalizing something like that just really sets us at it. I think that the reason we're at each other's throats politically so much is because first we start by normalizing something terrible and then we squabble over it after that. Like we lose the battle before we start. And then the ripple effects of that are all over the place. And so we could, have a very different world where we're not at each other's throats once we stop doing that. Anyhow, I was talking about committing resources. If you constantly have 100% of your resources committed, then that means that when something comes up, you don't have any reserve to commit, and that's obviously on the surface, like kind of at first, like at a kind of a simple glance, but basically correct one, unless there's some like extenuating circumstance, unless there's a very compelling reason why you would commit the 100, then you keep some back, and you can use your judgment, right? You can, if you're committed 70% and something looks pretty darn good, better than you've seen before, maybe you commit some but not all of what you have remaining, right? Just in case something even better comes along. Or if it's temporary, a few days, you can commit fully, and so on and so forth, right? But that's kind of all I meant. And you really, one of the ways that I see clearly, I think what I'm saying today may touch on this a little bit too, but really looking to declutter your thinking, and that's also about seeing things kind of foundationally, having the overall context of life understood about what's generally going on, and then things like how your mind works and how goals work. When you don't have that stuff figured out, then there's so much like kind of all the kind of periphery, or not really periphery, but what you're standing on or what you're surrounded with in life is blurry, right? Because goals are like part of everything you do, and your mind is. And even morality, right? You might not use that word, but it comes up all the time. Every time someone tries to pressure you into doing something, it's basically a moral sort of pressure they're putting on, right? So, and then we do spend a lot of our day dealing with moral pressure on us, right? So things like morality, goals, mind, it's and I'm talking about decluttering here. It's such and plugging my stuff at the same time for your benefit. I'm not, selling my stuff. I just want you to get the most out of it. So, if the context, if you think of kind of being surrounded, right? If the environment is it's like if your environment's all polluted, and if your environment at home is very disruptive, disorganized in a way that really affects your stuff. Like sometimes things can be messy, but they're not disorganized. Like if you can find everything. And this is a random good hint, but people confuse because like messy and disorganized can look similar to like an innocent bystander or an advice-giving bystander, a judgmental bystander. But if you are not being bottlenecked by disorganization, then you're not disorganized in a practical way, and that can help some of you who might feel like you're doing something wrong. But if you are being bottlenecked by disorganization, you can't find things well that you could have organized better ahead of time, then that is silly. If it's happening a lot, right? But if something just looks messy, but you know everything is, then you're not necessarily disorganized. And as long as someone else who might need to use it as well can find the stuff, if that comes up. Anyway, if we have this just metaphorical or illustrative scenario where your environment is disrupted, I'm just making a scenario to explain something to illustrate. So if you're or let's suppose that it's disrupted the minute you go outside of your office. Let's suppose the rest of your house is disrupted with family or extended family, or just outside there's a bunch of crap going on, or you're in a dorm and there's stuff. Then what happens is you have to stay. This is a pretty good illustration, actually, of a cool concept. What happens is you need to stay, or you'll feel like staying in your office, right? Because if you go out, it's disruptive. So you don't want to take steps towards where it's disruptive. Now take that illustration and apply it to people's understanding of life. Is if there's this confusion and blurriness about stuff like mind, goals, morality, and so forth, then it's disruptive if their mind starts to go there. If they start to think about life, right, or philosophize, whatever you want to think, call it, or characterize it. And practically speaking, this affects virtually everyone greatly. Often people don't even want to be alone with their own thoughts, because they start to reflect and they feel disoriented and so forth. So, or even if they don't, it's because their mind has get in the habit of not going there to think about these things because it's too much confusion. And so we stay restricted. if instead, oh, not only do we stay restricted, but then whenever it might matter, going back to the illustration where your physical environment is disruptive, like right outside of your room, then there might be stuff you want to get that's outside of your room, but now you feel conflicted, and if you actually go out, you are disrupted, right? I just said it's a disruptive environment. So if you need to go cook some food or whatever, or go out to do something, then you get disrupted, right? What people need to do is there's all sorts of stuff they need to get straight about their mind, understanding goals, their process for goals, and morality and so forth. And again, I'm not saying people are immoral or not. I'm saying that we're pressured by moral types of arguments and things that no matter what, right? And so that is inefficient in people's lives. So people need to go there to get it straight, but when they start to go there, it's too much, right, for people. And this is very, very real, very happening for most of everyone. You guys that have been with me for a while, less so, presumably, because we've been working on it. But so they need to go there. They go there, it's disruptive. The more you declutter that and get it straight, it's like having your, not like your most immediate environment, but like the next steps removed, clearer, and then you can and you're getting them correct, right? You're not just arbitrarily deciding about goals. Oh yeah, that's how it works, right? It's like flying a plane. You just kind of know where you want to go and you make corrections until you get there. Well, that doesn't work if you're. I talked about being in the wrong sea last time. I'm going to elaborate on that better and give you an even better understanding of what I meant. But so the more we declutter, including by gaining clarity about important things and concepts and things that keep coming up in our lives, then we can eyeball things much quicker. And so that the last several minutes was talking about we want to get to where the more clarity we have, the more we declutter with our own minds and our understanding of what's going on in the world regarding relevant things. I'm not talking about like understanding like what crime is happening in Paris, right? I'm talking about the things we're talking about, like things that have a strong impact on you. And whatever that might be. I'm not going to argue about whether something on the news would have a strong impact. It may or may not. But I'll stipulate and say whatever really has a strong impact. But obviously stuff like how your mind works, who you are, how you interact with your mind, goals, the kind of stuff we're talking about, that definitely does have a significant impact. So the more clarity you get, the more you can eyeball stuff. And then regarding your business and your resources and your time, by following the understanding line idea where you understand what you're doing better and better, and most everything you do for your business pursuits, you're doing it for the reason of gaining more understanding toward the ideal of what you're looking for with your business, then you'll get better, because you're gaining understanding, you'll get better and better at eyeballing as well. So everything we're talking about makes you automatically better at eyeballing things, making judgments in the moment, right? Because you can't always stop and reflect for a long time before every decision, literally, right? You just literally can't. You can ultimately get things all right in your head, but right now is right now, and you're always going to act at the level of understanding that you currently have. So you without realizing, you're always eyeballing things in the moment, right? You're always, by which I mean you're always making your best judgment about things based on the current level of understanding in your mind. So how do you know? You automatically will be eyeballing things based on where you're at, and then you keep getting understanding, and then your eyeballing will get better. But that kind of addresses that to a certain degree. I don't necessarily try to get full closure on questions or not, but just Megan writes, yeah, hopefully Jabir. You just joined, right? Yeah, it should be, you log in your members area and there's a big yellow link. There should be. Sorry, there's a big yellow link to the webinar schedule page, and then on the webinar schedule page, you scroll down to Thursday, or to it just in text, and then you should find the link. If you still can't find it, let me know. I'll try to help. Okay, we don't want to leave anyone behind here. All right, Megan says, my recurring battle is with feeling down, a bit down, in spite of understanding that I shouldn't measure success by looking at seemingly slow results in client conversion. Once or twice a month after doing outreach, follow-up, and meeting prospects and no conversions, I get the blues and have to battle a barrage. And I know you've had some success, Megan, with this, of incorrect default thoughts, trying to resolve them. Right, and this is good because you're realizing there's a struggle. Obviously, it's not good that you have issues with clients sometimes, but what's good is the way you're thinking about this. When you're struggling, you're looking for what's the deeper issue where I can win the game, so I'm not struggling even with this feeling down and through this thing. And so you're asking the right type of question, which is huge. By being able to do that in life in general, even someone that was getting clients faster but didn't know to ask that type of question, they're going to have all sorts of other issues in their life where they're unhappy and having problems, and they won't know how to fundamentally go about figuring it out. Where can I look for wrong ideas? Let me give you. Oh, good, excellent, Jabir. Let me give you a certain takeaway here. Let me go here. Let's see here. Nope, not that one. Okay, let me give you this one as a kind of a takeaway. Obviously, we'll talk about a number of things here. There'll be a few takeaways, but I'll give you this one. And you probably have a couple times, but you can go through my want to refresh your memory on my client getting series, and then of course Cotton's stuff is excellent as well, beyond excellent. But the great thing with search engine optimization is that you can prove, you can accumulate proof that's objective and out there, right? In most everything in life, it's very difficult to do that. You can get like a degree or something, but it's hard to prove yourself before you're started. But with SEO, you can have proof, right, of your rankings. You want to think about your sales funnel, right? You want to think about navigating categories I talked about in I'll get to this, what's on the slide in a second. But toward the end of Alchemy, I talked about conversion once, and I said there's a number of ways to look at conversion and sales, but one of them is navigating categories. And separately from your question about not feeling a little bit bad about not seeing progress, which I'll be addressing that in general today. But just specifically because we're getting clients is a big thing for most people in OMG. Just giving a few hints there. There's some category that you're missing, that you're getting put in, like that you're not realizing, is what I'm saying, that you're getting put in, or that you're not navigating your way out of, that you start in and you're not getting out of, Megan, and for anyone that struggles with getting clients. So again, either you're starting out in a certain category, like for example, the example of starting out in a category is you start out being a stranger, right, to someone, so they don't really trust you. And the first thing, with one of the things you want to do with getting leads, as I also talked about toward the end of Alchemy, is the idea of hanging out shingles, which I think you're probably doing. But a shingle means that you put something out there into the world. Could be a website. Business cards aren't that good, but that's an example. Could be a sign outside of your physical office. Could be LinkedIn stuff, or even if you cold email someone or whatever, you could think of it like a shingle if you think about it, because you're putting something out there that people could come across that could then cause them to make a move towards you, right? Where they say, okay, they contact you back, just like you'd see it simply with a website or business card. They come across it, and if they call you or they contact you, then that's good. Then now you're in a category where they've reached out to you. That's an example of navigating a category versus if you just kind of try to cold call someone you haven't gotten out of the category of someone that they haven't contacted, right, on their own initiative. And then you obviously want to come across as competent. You want to come across not as desperate, right? And you would, so things like that. So navigating categories, and if you're perennially having problems, then there's some category that you're, again, either starting in and not getting out, or that you're you're kind of jumping into or giving signals of. That same thing happens in relationships, in personal business. Well, there's getting clients is an example, right? Sales and conversion is really a subset of relationships, interestingly enough. And relationships is a fascinating topic for me, and it's one that I have a lot of recipes for too, a lot of specifics. But any issues with relationships, is often categories. One of the biggest categories that I'm very careful with, I've talked about this before, with relationships is staying on the correct side of benefit of the doubt. If you can just stay on the correct side of benefit of the doubt, and then if you're able to communicate in a reasonable manner with people, then you can navigate your way out of things, rather than just kind of be like out in the cold, right, without really much lifeline. Navigating means you're kind of, you can just sort of maneuver around until you get there, right? But you can't, by my way of talking, you can't navigate somewhere if you're in a car, you can't navigate in the car across the ocean, right? So you're locked out. But if you have the benefit of the doubt with someone, you generally are never locked out of any kind of reasonable result that you might want to get with them. Reasonable, like something that they might do, right? That's within the reason. Okay. So those are just a couple of hints there regarding the conversion process itself. Now let's talk about this takeaway here. This came up toward last session, and I thought, not this statement though, I talked about apples to oranges, and I talked about how with both your own mind and yourself with motivation, you don't want to mix your motivations between bad and good because your mind has trouble comparing those two. Like things that make you feel bad or things that like are painful for you. It's hard to like get something good if there's like painful stuff in the way. And as a matter of fact, when that kind of thing happens, then people try to motivate themselves with like a greater pain, like really turn off the pain they'll feel if they don't achieve their goal to overcome the kind of the smaller pain that of whatever might be taking action involves. The problem is you kind of need greater and greater pain in your life to deal with life that way. And it also, the good doesn't do a whole lot for you. Like good stuff doesn't motivate you very well because your mind has trouble comparing apples to oranges. And then the other issue that comes up with good and bad is with other people, and dealing with them is that if you try to do good stuff for someone and then also you do stuff that they really don't like, that violates important things. I'm not talking about property rights violations here. I'm just talking about stuff that they feel like is important, and you get it wrong. Then it's really hard to overcome that with a bunch of good. And it'll feel unfair. You're like, gosh, I've done this for that person, this for that person, this, and then but then there's something wrong, like one thing, and it screwed everything up. So I really try to keep things pristine, and that's the benefit of the doubt type situation too. And if something seems to be bad that comes up, then I really try to deal with it, like treat it as important, dissolve it somehow, have it be kind of fully dealt with one way or the other. Such as if you show up real late for a meeting or miss one, and that's important to someone to not have you do that, then you can let them know that's really important for you not to do that, and that you'll very much not do that in the future, and then being really careful to be on time or a couple minutes early several times in a row. So it kind of dissolves that. It's still going to hang around. It still means that you better not do it again, right? Your get out of jail free card is kind of gone at that point, even then. So I really try to be careful about not even doing the first violation of things that are important to somebody. That's very different than being perfectionistic. And I still haven't gotten to what's exactly on this slide yet, but I'll get to there. It's not that I'm trying to please people and do everything they want. It's that if I either either a relationship is not worth the bother, which in many cases it's not, or if it is worth the bother, then I'm very careful that whatever things are particularly important to someone, that I don't violate those things. Again, this is totally separate from morality. This is like practicality in terms of dealing with other people's minds, right? Like if you're going to violate things that are important to someone else, then you're like, if you just have to do that, or if you have to behave in a neglectful way and do it by kind of default or by accident, if you're just unwilling to be careful about what's important to somebody, then thinking that you're going to be successful relating to that person is just a kind of a pipe dream. It's just going to not be worth it. Even if the person doesn't just like react really negatively to you overtly, the drag is just going to be hardly worth it. Like what you're going to get back from them isn't really going to be all that great, right? So because you're violating something important. And I'm able to do this without any sort of paranoia, right? I don't like obsess about it or worry about it. I just get that there's a huge bang for your buck in treating what's important to other people that you're in various relationships with as important, and including trying to figure out what those things are, including sometimes having to think logically, pulling on threads, because you can't just ask somebody. You have to, because people don't often know themselves. They won't tell you very clearly, or often people feel like it's less important, you get less points, right, if they just tell you overtly and yada yada, or they feel wrong about saying something that's important to them, like they want to believe themselves that it's not that important, but it is, etc. So if you're going to be in a relationship with someone, then don't violate things that are important to them. Same thing, same topic about good and bad, and how it's apples to oranges, and it's going to feel unfair, but practically speaking, um, uh, a bad thing can trump all the good. Now, that leads to the question. I could probably relate this as well to dealing with other people, but we'll start with just dealing with yourself. So how do you deal with the fact that currently in your mind there's approach avoidance, there's things that you're motivated about that because you don't want to feel bad, right? Or with Megan's question about she can feel a little bit bad if she tries to do conversion and it's not working, right? Sales, it's not working, or not working as much as she wants. I know it's worked for us at times. Sorry, I keep having thoughts about that as well, but I'll put that aside for a moment, or my thought that's in my head. Hold on, then I might forget it. This is our real-time flow here. Just because it's being recorded, I might as well. I'll say this even. Let me see if I get it back. So we're talking about feeling a bit bad about with the sales thing. Oh, one thing that can be a block also to sales and conversion, and this has nothing to do with Megan or anyone else specifically. It's just something that pops into my mind, but it can affect people. Is a sense that doesn't seem like it, but just examine for this, any of you, is a sense of like entitlement. We all have this, and this is going to relate to standards and norms, actually. Interestingly enough, it's not the typical meaning exactly of entitlement, but there's a point where people feel like this will really help everyone if you what I'm about to say, and it relates to the overall topic of standards and norms, which is part of what I wanted to deal with today. There's a point where you feel like people should just at some point you've done enough, and people for the world, for a task, and for a sale. And you just feel like that's enough, and at that point, after doing all that, someone should say yes, or the task should get done, or the venture should succeed. And there's that norm, that standard in your mind without you realizing it, but that's how your mind sees. Your mind sees everything via norms and standards. It just operates based on that all the time. It has to. We need to embrace that, not deny it. So instead of calling it entitled, what I could say is that what people will have is, if it takes this much, I'm showing on the camera here, like I'm putting my hand up to a certain amount high, to achieve success in a task, like a sale or a business venture or something, and people feel like it should only take this much, and I'm putting my hand a little lower, then they'll eternally be unsuccessful at something and really not know why. I talk about this as an example at a little course I made for a bonus on, or a big course I made about information business. And I talked about getting affiliates, and I said that having affiliates promote it's terrific, or it's potentially terrific. You get good traffic that way, qualified and recommended and all that, or just getting referrals from clients is incredible. But it can take, or even getting testimonials is great, but it can actually take maybe 3 times more effort than you think it should take to get an affiliate to promote. They might they might say they're going to promote at a certain time and then not. They might say, if you do this and that, I'll promote for you. And then you do those and they still don't do it. But they kind of think they will, but then they end up not. And so you feel like, I did what I was supposed to do, and I didn't achieve the task. I didn't achieve the result I wanted. And we pick this up. This is this is reinforced in school. School reinforces this sense of like result entitlement. This isn't like government entitlement, and this isn't like a moral failing. It's just a deep kind of misunderstanding of the mind, which basically everyone has. Is the sense like I've done what I was supposed to do, like I studied the right amount or whatever, and then you get the result you're supposed to get. In a lot of cases, that does happen in school. Sometimes with like essays and reports, that there's more of a mismatch. Often with like studying, at least, like if it's more, anyway, if it's more like a science thing where you can just kind of memorize all the stuff and you can get the grade you expect to get. But one way or the other, you put in enough effort, let's say in school, and you're supposed to get like an A, right? And you feel like, God, I put all this effort and I didn't get the grade that I expected to get, because the teacher can arbitrarily, right? The teacher just decides that you get the A or not, right? So it's ultimately kind of arbitrary. There might be some measuring involved with certain tests and so forth, but ultimately the teacher can just kind of dictate it because the teacher makes the test in the first place, right? So the test just kind of makes it look less arbitrary, but the test is created by someone, either the teacher or someone else arbitrarily, ultimately. So you can achieve a result in school that's disconnected from a real-world objective result, right? And so you can get a sense that you kind of ask, well, what is it that I have to do to get an A? And if you do that, right, then you're supposed to be given the result, the achievement, the A or whatever. The problem is people take that mentality. It gets deeply ingrained in our psyche. We don't realize it. And we take that mentality out into being an entrepreneur. And we feel like there's some amount of stuff we're supposed to follow and do and effort we're supposed to do. And at some point, we're supposed to get the result. And what people will do is, because the mind works based on norms and standards, is even when it thinks it's getting outside of that, all it's doing is increasing it by like 50%. So what I mean is, it's like, all right, well, I think I did what I should do, and I should succeed now. And if they don't, they're like, all right, well, this is unfair or kind of ridiculous, but I'll do 50% more. But at that point, at 50%, but that 50% of what? Of the arbitrary amount, it's still the same entitled sense of outlook, where there's supposed to be some amount of effort or work or whatever you're supposed to do, and at that point, you're supposed to make the sale in your own head. And okay, maybe I'll go out of my way and I'll do 50% more or twice as much. You, as an entrepreneur, you need to, that mindset kills you. But it's so deeply ingrained in how the mind works, right? So we need to be able to break out of it. And stop freaking thinking about anything like that. The standard of what it takes to get a result is whatever it takes within, and this is again why morality, why individual property rights and so forth matters so much, is because that helps identify the very outer boundaries. And other than that, you do whatever it takes, right? Whatever it takes can be misinterpreted or dangerous if people don't understand some sort of something, right? By having a real bare bones but correct sense of boundaries, like with morality, and then piling onto that whatever you need to do to have your life in the right kind of balance, or whatever the right word is. Balance isn't the goal. The goal is to not have things fall apart in your life that would cause worse problems than not achieving your goal, right? Spending some time with family and hygiene and health and so forth and sleep and all that. So you have the right boundaries, but within those outer, correctly revealed boundaries you get from clarity and good thinking, then you do whatever it takes to get the result, period. Once you go to whatever it takes, that magically dissolves this standard of norm thinking. If you get the concept right, you can utter the phrase whatever it takes, but not get the concept right? And your mind will revert back to this kind of norms and standards thing, where at some point you're entitled to the result. So what you're feeling probably, Megan, is that you've done what you're supposed to do, and where's your A, right? And I don't mean that in any way critically. Again, I think we all fall prey to that. And so, and then you say, well, look, and I've even done twice as much, and where's my reward? Where's my result? And then the whatever it takes mentality is also great, but it can't just be a phrase. You need to understand it the way I'm explaining it. Things happen quicker and easier when you can properly get to whatever it takes, which involves finding smart boundaries. See, when people try to go straight to whatever it takes without building the understanding, of the right boundaries, then the boundaries kind of come in by default and they're overly restrictive and so forth. So you find the right ones, like I just named a few, right? Get enough sleep, pay enough attention to your family and personal relationships that you're not going to regret later. And if you have to drop, but that means you might drop some personal relationships that are too high maintenance. I'm not saying you should or shouldn't, but you have to be, might have to be willing to, right? Oh, and it just depends. Well, if you had to choose between a particular high maintenance relationship for now and financial independence, which would you choose? And then you could say to yourself, look, if I have to drop being high maintenance with a person for a little while, and they won't be my friend, I'll pay some attention to them, but I won't do everything that they're going to expect. If that person doesn't still value my friendship, and if in a few years I'm free and then I might have more time for the person, if they won't value me then, are they worth it? And I'm not saying they are or aren't. I'm just giving you good questions to ask. And I really am not. That's not tongue in cheek when I say I'm not saying it is or isn't worth it. You just have to have clarity and decide for yourself what's worth it. But get the right boundaries and then get the right whatever it takes mentality, and you'll stop feeling like you should have already achieved your goal. If you haven't achieved it, that literally means you shouldn't have achieved it yet, right? When you're an entrepreneur, you only get your goal when you should have gotten it, right? There's no teacher, there's no big teacher in the sky, right? And God's not this way. This isn't how God operates. So there's no great teacher in the sky that's grading you and deciding when you're supposed to get your result. You should get it when you do get it, and not sooner. And if you're feeling frustrated, it's because you're making that mistake. So that should be a pretty good takeaway and insight right there. So thank you very much for that question. All right, not to give you guys whiplash, but to continue on here, and this all relates, right? This is all about standards and norms and motivation and so forth, goals. So with your own mind, with feeling bad, and this can further help in a separate way, things that might, where you're tempted to, sometimes people don't want to acknowledge current reality, so you might feel like you're motivated, like you might not really want to spend a couple hours a night after work working on learning how to rank websites. So I'm illustrating a scenario for you to explain something. So suppose you have a person who feels like, well, I don't really want to do that, spend another extra hours because that's to cut into something else that I might want to do. And of course, like if we had all the money we needed, we probably wouldn't, of all the things we could do with our time, we probably wouldn't spend 2 hours, at night working on learning how to rank websites, right? So on the one hand, there's one might not greatly want to do that. Then on the other hand, someone might say, well, but if I'm tight on money and I'm not financially independent, well, I feel bad about that. So I feel worse about not having much money. I feel worse about myself and so forth. So that'll help me overcome the feeling bad about spending 2 hours. Well, there's a way you can, but then I'm like, but David told me that I want to focus on, like if I focus on bad, I have to keep on focusing on bad and more bad. And if I can turn around to focusing on good, then I can be motivated in a different way. And I can also be more magnetic and attractive to others, which will further help me in business, right? Because business involves, to some significant degree, relationships with other people, in most every case. I don't mean fully, but to some degree. And being attractive and magnetic is going to help with that greatly. So David says I should focus on the good, but realistically, I don't really want to spend that extra 2 hours. So, but I do. I can imagine the good of having a bunch of money. But then there's the bad of how I would, as I said, like the bad of doing some extra work, the bad of how I would feel if I don't have very much money, and including like day to day, I might wish I could buy stuff and I can't, and then I feel a little bit bad about that. Not like terrible, but it's it's part of what I think motivates me. So what do I do there, David? Well, here's what I realized I could show you, and something I do. And when I mentioned this to Mike as well on the phone after last session, he said, "Yeah, Dave, you've helped me do this. Like you've done this together with ourselves many times. So it's true that I already do this, but I didn't realize to explain it to you." What you do is you look at where you want to be, where you're at now, and frame things in terms of the concept of better. And so what I mean is, if you would in one way of looking at things feel bad about your current situation of money, and you'd think that that would motivate you, and then you like to imagine having a bunch of money, although then at the same time you might think, damn, I want to do that, and it does motivate me, but it also kind of makes me feel even worse about my current situation if I think about all the things I want. So what do I do about that? and that's right. So that's not, again, that's also counterproductive. If focusing on what you really want and the ideal, that tends to make people feel bad as well as good, and they have this mixed issue with it, right? And then they have to worry about dumbing down their goals and ideals. So how do you do it? Well, if you look at it in terms of the differential and say, all right, well, here's where I'm at, and here's where the ideal is, and which one's better, period. You don't have to ask. See, there's something I want to get into at some point with you guys, and that is seeing doesn't work the way you think. And seeing is like really stuff gets triggered in your own mind, including by questions you ask, templates you have, your existing model of the world. So there's certain types of questions and a model of the world you can have that where you'll see bad. But then there's a whole different model you can have where in that same type of case you won't see bad. So if you just say, well, here's where I'm at now and here's where I want to be, which one's better? Then there's no bad in that equation. You're like, well, yeah, it's a lot better to have a bunch of money. And let me ask you, is there any place where bad has to fit in that? You just say, here's where I'm at, here's where I want to be, which one, and the greater the difference, the more motivation. But there doesn't have to be any bad. You're just like, oh, right? Let's suppose there's a person and they're not acting the way you want, and in your current or previous model of the world, you would feel a little bit bad about that, and you feel like that would motivate you to change, to pressure the person to change or whatever. But really, it would just kind of frustrate you, right? Sometimes if someone's not doing what you want. So instead, you can think about, well, ideally, what do I want them to do? And how are they acting now? And then which is better? Okay, so I'm motivated. Now, whenever you're motivated by something, right, that's an ideal that you want to achieve. How do you go about it? You go about it by building understanding of how to get there until you just get there, right? Part of the process of building understanding is you're trying to get there, right? As I've said many times, none of this building understanding stuff is going to cause you to stay still, right? Taking action is one of the things. And as a matter of fact, you're actually more motivated to take action, just like Kevin wonderfully illustrated in his post, which I might have covered before the recording. I can refer back to it. But where he reported being much more motivated once he looked at my success framework video and saw the idea of measuring progress by understanding, the understanding line, right? Building understanding rather than by results. Results will happen better and faster if you measure progress by understanding, right? And you can picture it with if someone's not doing what you want. If you just measure progress by results, then what are you going to do? You're going to behave, and you're going to try to behaviorize and pressure the person, and maybe get upset at them. You're going to do all sorts of things that might get you short-term results or might not, and will generally be counterproductive for that relationship, and plus with your relationship with your own mind, because you'll develop the habit of that's what you do in private with yourself. Right, if you pressure other people, you'll do the same to yourself in a lot of cases, and it'll feel more normal. Right, and norms. What feels normal is then how our brain operates, and then it'll tend to be just be counterproductive, right, for the future. And it can even spread. That person can like you less, and even either kind of implicitly kind of communicate that less liking for you or dislike for you to others, or they can actually tell a story of how you acted to someone else, and that can diminish you with other people as well potentially. So you might have no chance at getting the person to in order to build on achieve goals by building understanding, you might give up the super instant fast gratification. but then everything else works in your favor, in essence, and you, yeah, essentially. But that might even be false. Like I feel it pretty much just tends to be faster in every way by focusing on building understanding to get to where you're at. So this takeaway here that's on this slide, and I'll get to this second phrase down here, but the takeaway here is that anytime you feel like there's badness, like kind of being motivated by pain in your way of thinking or feeling about a situation or the result you want, stop, take a look at the differential, right? So there's supposed pain in not having enough money, not being able to buy what you want, right? But that's actually only if you have a certain model for how you look at it, right? It's arbitrary. You don't have to. An illustration of why it's arbitrary is if you could take your situation, the thing that you're saying is bad, if you could find any context at all in which you wouldn't have to feel bad, then it's arbitrary that you're feeling bad about that instant. So if you have a certain amount of money in your bank account, if it's possible to not feel bad while if there's any context, any mental or otherwise environmental context to where someone could have that much money in their bank account and they don't currently feel bad about it, or even getting taxed or violated in some way. If there's any way that could happen without a person in the moment feeling bad about it, then feeling bad about it is arbitrary. There's a reason, but there's ultimately the reason for the reason terminated nothingness. You do not have to feel bad. You could, but you could not. And if you ever don't have to feel bad, then which do you want? Right? You don't have to. So you can either feel bad or not. Which one's better? Right, there you go. So given that it's not fully dictated that you have to feel bad because you have a certain amount of money in your bank account, you can't have a certain amount of money that you make next month because that didn't happen yet, right? That doesn't even exist, right? So then you don't have to feel bad. So instead you just take a look at the situation, look at what the full ideal is. Now you can look at ideals more clearly. Generally people have some issue with ideals, like ideal goals or whatever, because the word does lead to perfectionism. Am I going to be disappointed? No. You can feel hope and motivation and excitement and all that. You get your ideal at the ideal, whatever that might be, but find like an actual ideal that like what I mean is $100 million might actually be an ideal. 3 or 4 or 5 million might be an ideal because you might not get anything better after that. It might just be catering to mistakes, and it might not. I'm just saying that you need to, or having one significant other that you really have a great romantic relationship with might be ideal, and having 4 or 5 of them might not be, right? And I'm not telling you what's correct. I'm just saying that it's easy to see that things don't extrapolate in a linear way, right? The curve for everything isn't linear up. Which simplifies things. If you think it is, then you can never reach anything, right? But there's the way that real life works is you can actually maximize all sorts of stuff realistically, money, relationships, and so forth. So figure out an ideal. Oh, and the other thing you can do is say, look, how about I worry whether I need $100 million next, or even 3 or 4 or 5 million next, and say, look, how about I just get out of debt? Or how about I just have enough where for the next 6 months I can live cheaply and be okay, and I have that much money in my bank account. Whatever it might be, or you can chop it down further. Whatever it might be, and say that's an ideal because at that point I can stop and think what the next thing will be. You say I don't have to stop there, but that's a good point, a good place to shoot for. You see, so now you're not dumbing down your goals. You're saying I'm going to set it there, hit that, and then at that point, so the full ideal there is to hit a point and then assess. That's the goal. The goal isn't to hit a point; it's to hit a point and assess at that point. It's one thing, hitting it and assessing together. right? So your ideal, your scenario that you're picturing is part of the results formula, right? What you want the future to look like is you. I'm just picking something. I'm not telling you this has to be yours, but all right, you have 6 months breathing room, which must mean that you found a way to make that money, right? Or save it at least. So that's a lot of competence right there, right? You must be on the right track, or maybe not must be, but you may well be, right? Might have picked up some building blocks and understanding along the way, and you're assessing from there. You're thinking, what next, right? What's the next place where I'll get to and assess? And then if at some point you're dead certain that you figured it out regarding a particular thing, then great. Then you'll say, well, I'm just going to hit that. And then you might say at that point, I'll double check and make sure I figured it out. Or maybe you figured it out so clearly that you don't even need to double check. You're just like, all right, at that point, I'm good, and I'll worry about the next thing in life, something different, my health, or or helping other people, or getting my relationship straight, right? The point where money is taken care of. Then I will have decluttered money out of my life. Wow, that'll really declutter, and I'll have a lot more bandwidth and clearness. Freed up to focus on something else, to really break through with something else. And I'm not saying you neglect your relationships along the way to getting financially independent, but maybe you won't break through with relationships while you're breaking through with money. Maybe you will, but maybe you won't. I tend to try to break through with one thing at a time. Okay. So there you go. So now I've illustrated pretty well, I'm not saying perfectly, but pretty well how to use ideals and this idea of better. And whenever someone's not doing something what you want or whatever, you stop and think, well, what would be ideal? Right? And sometimes when you think what would be ideal, it's kind of funny and you realize you're being a little silly yourself, right? You're like, well, ideally they do this, that, and the other thing. Okay, hold on, wait a second, right? Maybe that's a little ridiculous, what I thought the other person was quote unquote supposed to do. Or you don't think they're supposed to do it. You just say, well, it would be ideal if they did. If this guy promoted me 4 times this year, that'd be ideal. I wouldn't even want more. That might be too much focus. So that's my ideal. I don't need to be upset. Right? Obviously, it's ridiculous to be upset in life because you haven't achieved all your ideals already. Right? Just kill yourself now. Totally tongue-in-cheek there, of course. But if you're going to be upset for things not being perfect, then however bad things are, they already are. Right? And then you focus on your ideals. You focus on the differential between your ideal and where you're at in the way of saying which one's better. Okay, great. So I want that. And then as I continue on, you'll have an additional great context where if you understand that you're not your mind, then this will make even more sense, what I'm saying. Because the ideals are for your mind, this mechanism, to go for. Your mind doesn't feel pain or not, believe it or not. It manipulates you with pain and pleasure to rubber stamp its stuff or to agree with stuff. Or on the other way to put it, it doesn't manipulate you. It's just kind of the way everything's rigged up so that we have the situation we have where we can have abundance with love and so forth. But your mind doesn't feel pain. You feel pain. So your mind, you just want your mind to feel like the correct ideals are important within the right boundaries, parameters. And then it will do its thing, ideally. You just want to set it up with the right ideals. When you see things that way, like your mind might think, oh, wait, I want an easier ideal, then I can expend less energy. But that's your mind. Your mind ultimately, again, it's a mechanism, so it just needs to be programmed right in the way that's going to help you the best. So you obviously want your mind to go after ideals. Remember, there could be stepping stones, right, like I talked about, where you get to a certain point and assess, but you see how in this model there's no room for just feeling upset because you haven't reached an ideal. Instead, you can feel excited because of the ideal, and that's it. So you just look at, you point your mind, you say, here, mine, so to speak, and you don't talk either, but I'm just giving you a fun little illustration that at least approximates it for now. All right, well, here's how things are now. Here's an example of an ideal. Can we come up with a better ideal? Or is it fine to say that's a good ideal for now and we'll assess when we hit there? And which one's better? And do you feel it? Like if you don't feel like you know which one's better, then that your mind doesn't get it yet. But if you feel like, yeah, this one's currently better, then you could say like, well, do you have any objections? Well, it'll be too much effort. Okay, so are you going to be doing something? Too much effort makes no sense. your body and mind is going to be doing something, giving you repetitive thoughts, negative thoughts, doing all kinds of stuff, itching, right? So then the question is, well, wait, is there something more important? Is there an ideal mind that you think is more important than achieving this? I'd say, well, sure, sitting on my ass, watching TV, doing what other people tell me to do. And you might say, so if I achieve those ideals, let's suppose I sit on my ass and watch TV for the next year, where will I be? Is achieving that ideal actually going to have the impact on my life? And again, stepping aside for a second from that scenario, I'm not telling you what's right. I'm telling you, I'm showing you how to decide for yourself. So back into the thing. So you're talking to your mind. What's the impact of sitting on your ass going to be, or what's the impact versus the ideal? Oh, and literally your mind didn't make these connections until you do it. You might think that it's obvious. Things that are obvious after you run through a scenario were not obvious, and that's a huge secret to thinking in life and how your mind works. Is, again, things can be dead obvious when you think them through with scenarios like this, but your mind literally did not make the connection before at all. So your mind can and will, I don't mean yours specifically, but a person's mind can and will decide that sitting on your ass watching TV has more of an impact, is more important than achieving financial independence. You might have an ideal of being able to sit around on your ass, but what you can do is say, well, how about I make it so I can sit around on my ass if I want to, because I have financial and relationship independence, where I have the time and space to do that, and the money, and I have not people breathing down my neck relationship-wise where I can do that too. And then at the point where I can, then I can decide what I want to do from there. How about that? Then you get the best of all worlds. And your mind, that's kind of how I look at things, is I kind of want to get, or I'm pretty much there almost. The only way I'm not there is in life, just speaking practically and just kind of doing the kind of reality TV thing where we like to be genuine on the internet. Yeah. But it's just that OMG is at a point where if I just walked away from it, that would be ridiculous, right? So in order to be like kind of fully free, I just need to find a way to maintain OMG, but where some of the tasks that I kind of do just because I have to in order to not have OMG just go away, but that I'd really rather not do, where those get done somehow, in some way, or by some other way. And just outsourcing isn't as easy as it sounds with certain things that involve my own bank account and things like that, merchant processing. But other than that, other than the fact that I just ended up building something that walking away from would be a little bit ridiculous, then relationship-wise, I have very little pressure with my time. And I'm not, this of course isn't some kind of brag or backdoor brag. I'm just trying to give you a sense of reality in a way that this can help your own ideal standards and norms give a sense of things. But other than maintaining OMG, where I'm not willing to just have it implode on people, and then but financially, other than that, but in terms of actual money, I can do what I want, except for buy anything I want, of course. No matter how rich you are, you can never buy everything you want. You can always come up with some more ridiculous thing. But I can live reasonably comfortably, and relationship-wise, I don't have a lot of pressure on me, or I don't have a lot of expectations on me. Probably less than 99.999% of the relationship population. Of course, I voluntarily like to spend time with my wife and family to some degree, but I don't have to very much. There's a minimum, but that has to be. You can't. The totally zero as a minimum would make no sense in a marriage, right? But anyhow, but even that is like my own voluntary sense of what makes sense, not really imposed on me strongly. Although at some point, again, it would be a marriage would literally make no sense with zero time. But anyhow, then you can get there and assess, right? So for me, it's a little bit like finding a way to get some of the things done for our OMG apart from me, and then assess kind of from there how I can best move forward between sitting on my ass and helping people. So and that's good though, because it's weirdly motivating. It's like a real boundary or a parameter, at least for me. My mind is naturally very motivated to be able to do what I want. And I don't mean do what I want. It's freedom from, not freedom to, right? Like I don't want to be able to buy whatever I want, or my mind isn't motivated by that. There's not like status, that kind of stuff. Get other people to do what I want. I'm not motivated by that. Some people are. I'm not making a value judgment about that. It just doesn't happen to be how my mind is like wired up by default. I just never really was that into those things. I don't dream of having like a lot of power over people or being able to buy all kinds of stuff. So that makes it easy in one sense. But so my mind is very motivated by like laziness, right? I can even defeat my son's willpower. My son has immense willpower, you wouldn't believe. But when it comes to being lazy, if I really just want to lay down or something like that, I can even overcome his great desire to get me up. And we'll have like arguments or tug of wars about it, but I'll actually win because my willpower to be lazy is so powerful. So when I harness that, right, to do what I've done, it's funny. I think it's funny as I say it, but it's actually true, right? So, but it's not necessarily the same for everybody, right? Just like what we want in a significant other might be different. Some people really want looks or some aspect of looks, whereas other people really want other things from a person, a sense of security or intelligence or status, right? And things that are kind of neutral or fairly harmless, then you probably just want to stick with what they are and harness them if they're harmless. So weirdly enough, being lazy, it seems, is actually harmless as far as I can tell. And it's so motivating for my particular mind. And I say this because it's kind of outside of how we're supposed to feel, right? And so it's another illustration of thinking outside of standards and norms, if you need to, or because anyway, if you need to doesn't make a lot of sense. But you constantly need to, when you're thinking, navigate outside of standards and norms. Your mind operates within them, but then you need a way to separately work outside of them, which is kind of the greater point I wanted to get to, believe it or not. But I point this out because I think it'll really help a lot of you guys to identify what motivates you for real. So literally what motivates me, helping others doesn't motivate me much, believe it or not. Status, buying stuff, having everyone clap for me, all sorts of stuff doesn't motivate me nearly as much as the idea of waking up in the morning and having nothing that I have to do. And not for one day, but for like the foreseeable future, right? So laziness is so motivating for me, for my mind. It's not me, right? But myself, my mind, which I use as kind of self as I define it as like your mind, body, and so forth. So I harness that, right? And then what conditions do I need? Well, I need enough money that I can live like reasonably, and I need relationships that. Oh, I'm also extremely motivated to be in a like romantic relationship with someone that I personally find very attractive, right? So those two things are immensely motivating for me, like really, really motivating, and where I really want both. Probably if I absolutely had to choose, actually I couldn't even tell you. I literally couldn't tell you which one I'd choose if I had to choose one or the other. But then, so those two things motivate me greatly by default, and then other things don't. This isn't to talk about myself, this is to give examples, right? And easiest to talk about myself in that case, to give example. And then I've been able to frame the rest around those ideals and try to get them both, and I've been able to by being ruthless about those things. Right, like identify them and then don't have these arbitrary boundaries of what people say I'm supposed to want, right? To my parents, for example, where my significant other went to college was very important, right? Status is just very important to them. They wouldn't put it that way themselves, but just that's the way they think. And so that was my initial environment. But to me, that was ludicrous. Or a lot of people, they might say intelligence. And I was like, no, I want someone that I personally find extremely attractive. That will motivate me. I'm not in any way saying that people should feel that way, but it definitely the way that my mind was wired up. And things like anything else was just a pale, hilarious second to me. It just doesn't matter. Of course, they had to like me back, things like that. But that was so if you could add that if you want, or that maybe that's obvious, right? That's kind of inherent to a romantic relationship. Actually, no. Actually, some people just because of status, they want the status, so they're happy to be married to someone that other people find very attractive, and they don't even care so much about what that person thinks of them. Actually, that's probably motivates a lot of people. For me, that isn't the way it was. For me, it really mattered that I found the person very attractive and that they liked me a lot. So that because like I wanted like romance, And again, none of this is any value judgments one way or the other. I'm giving example illustrations. You want to identify for yourself what actually motivates your mind, kind of by default. Things that are violate property rights, and this is again where this comes in like magic, that you don't want, but if it doesn't, all the other norms and standards don't matter. So the property rights thing lets us navigate outside of norms and standards. Right? As long as it doesn't violate property rights, it doesn't matter how allegedly ridiculous it is. Right? And it's somewhat ridiculous to greater degree to some people than others. To some people might really identify with the things that motivate me, and it doesn't seem odd. To others, it might seem ridiculous that I'm motivated purely by laziness and someone that I personally find very hot, right, and who is attracted to me. It's pretty hard to find anything that motivates me outside of that, like in my mind, like inherently. There has to be, well, and I guess logically then I got to the point where I realized that understanding about fundamentally what's going on and how the world works was going to help me with everything, right, and be happy. So I got that. So I'm very motivated to figure that stuff out. Then what happens is to help other people, the bang per buck is just so tremendous at some point where the things I figured out were so big. But I'm not like some people I watch them and they really like helping other people, like where it really has a payoff for them. It hardly has to be much of a differential. They just, if they can give money to someone and that person is like really helps them, then they're pretty motivated to do it. And so not me, that is by default. And so for me, there has to be like a large differential. But at this point, stuff I figured out is such a big differential that I do care about other people. But the good news is that I, like for me, I understand winning to be everyone's happy, right? And so, but it doesn't like juice my mind to just go out and help other people. Like some people, they go and work in a soup kitchen and they come back feeling great. For me, it's not like that by default. So, but then what you do is you find a way to harness it constructively, whatever you're kind of start with, right? As long as it's not outside the boundary of violating property rights, and you do want to care about other people. Love. But then you work your motivation as it happens. So ideal, and then you look at, well, is this you want your mind to feel like, okay, yeah, it's better if I get to that ideal rather than where I'm at right now. That's it. There's no bad that you have to feel. In the popular book Mindset, this woman talks about how growth mindset by experiments have shown that it's massively beneficial compared to like a scarcity mindset or like an entitlement mindset or whatever. And the trouble with a growth mindset is it can be misinterpreted as just like improving your health nonstop, making more and more and more money, having more and more relationships, more and more status. And growth in and of itself is not helpful. Ideals are what's helpful, and understanding. The one thing that's always helpful is growing understanding towards things that are important, that'll actually have an impact for what's actually going to lead to good. So again, if you're someone that is thinking in terms of a growth mindset, make sure that you measure growth through understanding of things that are important, including understanding that what is important about what leads to good, and grow there, measure progress there, and then everything will work out. But if you have a growth mindset without that, which is very common, then you're going to get yourself on a treadmill, and you're going to have a lot of results and have plenty of goodness in your life, but you're also going to have a lot of frustration and badness and anger, and you're going to ultimately not win in the sense of being on the path towards everyone being happy. All right. I'm trying to think what I'm going to want to go to discussion. Let me put this slide here. I have kind of a major slide. I think I'll just kind of toss this out there to you. Oh, I wanted to explain something. And this relates. I said there's 3 types of goals last time, where you can easily you don't even have to navigate. You almost just reach out and get what you want, like going to Starbucks that you already know where it is. If your goal is to get some coffee or calling Postmates and they deliver it, whatever. So where it's just you usually just achieve it without even trying to having to like figure out a little bit of the way to get there. Then there's where you navigate your way, but you're in the correct general paradigm or whatever. And then I said there's times when you're not in the right one. And I asserted that this tends to be overlooked by goal achievement philosophy. It can look like it's not overlooked. And sometimes it's somewhat not overlooked. And people will break you out of your box and your paradigm and shift it and so forth. But and then it may be that certain gurus really do have things figured out, but then I'm helping you in the case of not misinterpreting or missing their larger point. So I don't know one way or the other the full kind of enlightenment that various people have. I know some people that are awesome that talk about paradigms, for example. But regardless, let's just talk about ourselves here and make sure that we get this kind of more fully. It's easy to think that you are looking for the right C, that you're looking for the right paradigm, but still be limiting yourself in a greater box, which I've referred to that idea various times. And I have something to share with you right now that about and it relates to everything I've been talking about so far, that can be key for this. The real C that's invisible, that is gonna keep people locked in, even if they think that they're looking to break outside of their paradigm, and so forth, is norms and standards. And what that means is, ultimately, there's stuff that just feels right. Like when I was talking to help Megan before, but I was talking to everyone. And I was saying that, like, that example of a norm or standard of like, well, this is how much I'm supposed to do to get this result. And maybe I'm willing to do 50% more or twice as much. But the more I do past what I feel like I'm supposed to do, the more I feel like I'm stretching, the more like I feel like I'm stretched thin or I'm doing too much. And I'm more and more feel a sense of unease or frustration or bad or like I'm doing something wrong. But that can only happen if we're measuring by that initial standard, you see? We need a way to get to, when necessary, get outside or think outside of norms and standards. And that's the invisible thing that's going to hold us back. And when people perennially have difficulty with a result, relationships, or money, whatever, then the wrong C has to do with what feels, again, with norms and standards, rather than what might look like they're jumping into a different C or paradigm or trying something totally new. They might say, oh, David, yeah, I was in this one C, and then I decided to do something totally different to make money, or a totally different approach, or I'm working on personal improvement or personal growth in order to help me get in the right C. The trouble is these norms and standards are so invisible and so powerful that people are unable to break out of them. When people do break out of original norms and standards, it's because they got together with people that have different norms and standards, and that pulls them out of it. Or it's like if you travel to another country, that can help you break outside of your culture. However, what we need is something that where we're not even restricted by that. See, what we need ultimately is a way, and I have it for you, is a way, and I've been demonstrating and really alluding to it all the way, but we need a way where we can see outside of norms and standards, even if nobody sees it, even if we're fully surrounded by like everyone who sees things in the same norm and standard way regarding something, we need a way out even if that's the case, in order to assure ourselves being able to achieve things that we want in life. And so, for example, when I talk about winning, my only definition ultimately of winning and my only ultimate ideal is for all bad to be gone, all bad ideas to be dissolved, and then we can have ever-increasing goodness. We can make more good stuff at that point, as I say, but perfection in that way. That's outside of like every norm and standard that exists for everyone that I've ever heard, pretty much, right? So how can we need a way to be able to get to thoughts like that, regardless of whether anyone is saying different. Because even Christians or other religious people that might think that there's a heaven or nirvana, their idea is that, well, we lose by ourselves, but then God by Deus Ex Machina, like God's just going to, at some point, just fix everything magically or arbitrarily. But they're content to just die and make the world a better place, right? My norm or not norm, my ideal is outside of all of that. And I think that God's rigged it so we can do it, or and even an individual, not we, because I'm not a we, I'm just one individual. And so if it's we, then it's outside of my control, right? But I think God's rigged it so that one person can make it happen ultimately. You might say, well, David, how is that possible? Well, that's not how I look at it. I look at it by the opposite can't be right. That God has doomed us to badness and there's no way out of it. That anything that we can personally do, that doesn't make any sense. And what happens if I pursue the ideal of perfection when it comes to understanding bad ideas, dissolving bad ideas? Is that detrimental in some way? No, I don't see any drawback to it either. So the opposite of it being correct makes no sense. Where I said like God's kind of doomed us, or doomed each individual, right? Because if everyone has to do it together, or else no one can do it, that's weird. It's out of our control. Whenever someone says the solution is people have to do such and such, that isn't a solution. If more than one individual needs to make a decision, that's not a solution. Or it's a solution that implies total helplessness on the part of the individual. And the only entities that exist are individuals. We should care about all people, right? And care about all individuals so we can think globally, so to speak, in that way. But the only decision-making entities, the only entities with free will are individuals. America doesn't have free will. America can't make moral judgments or moral decisions. Individuals do, right? Neither can black people or white people. Or the Japanese can't attack us, right? Individuals can violate individual property rights. Groups can't. Groups don't make decisions. Groups don't have free will. Groups don't have morality. When we think or act as if groups do have morality, then we make horrific decisions and terrible horrors sometimes result, like wars and so forth. You have to think in terms of groups having a moral existence, a decision-making capability. It's an absolutely horrific mistake because sometimes it leads to like absolutely horrible horrors, right? Nuclear bombs going off. They already have, right? Like in Hiroshima and Nagasaki and so forth. And all sorts of other horrors that have been done by individuals in all sorts of cultures and countries. I never mean to pick on America specifically, by the way. Okay, so we need a way out of norms and standards. And then I'll go back to this slide. If we try to get our brain out from being motivated by them, and operating on goals and stuff, then we actually run into a problem because our mind can't get out of it. As far as I understand, at least, if someone understands, I'm always still working on this, and if other people find something to clarify, that's great. But here's where I'm at, okay? And I'll give an overview at least so you can get a sense of my understanding of what's going on ultimately. So I know for sure we're not our mind because our mind, I've talked about this before. Our mind changes. We can't be something that changes and so forth. I'm not going to get into that. If we stipulate that we're not our mind at all, not part of our mind. Oh, I thought of a good illustration for conscious mind, just to kind of clarify some ideas with that real quick. Suppose there's like a factory with factory workers, and then there's a supervisor, and he goes around, like let's just say he has an actual flashlight. Let's say I forget the flashlight. So he just goes around and he examines parts of the factory floor. Or maybe he has multiple factories and he examines a particular part of the factory or a whole factory at a time, but then there's other stuff he's not examining. Okay. Actually, let's remove the factory workers since that could confuse the issue since they're conscious. Let's suppose that you have an automated factory with robots and multiple buildings. Okay, so there's a factory in one place, but it has 10 buildings. And all those buildings consist of robots. And then you have a person who's overseeing it. Let's just say there's one person to keep the illustration clear and simple. And there's an example of thinking in scenarios, of course. Then the overseer goes into one of the buildings and looks around that building. Let's say it's a pretty small building. He can mostly look it over at once. Okay, that building he's looking over, are the robots now conscious? No, right? We could say he's conscious. Okay, again, keeping things pretty simple. Let's just say that it's reasonable to say that he's conscious, like of that particular building. factory building, right? But the robots don't become conscious because he looks at it. However, there's something going on with those robots. We can differentiate them. We might want to call them something different, or maybe we might want to have a word for the robots that are currently being observed or examined or overseen. Maybe he can even take over the controls so that they operate. This is a good. This is good. A good expansion of the scenario. Let's suppose that the robots operate by default. But then the overseer can come in, and let's suppose that by default that kind of things get a little bit off, and he needs to come in once a day and adjust things manually, and then everything works fine as long as he does that. Okay, and so I guess this guy works 10 hours a day, and he goes 1 hour for each of the 10 buildings. All right, we could remove some buildings so the guy's not so overworked, but this is fine for now. So he comes in and he's conscious of the particular building. Of course, he's not conscious of every aspect of that building, right? But he sees what's going on in that building with those robots, and he goes in and manually does his adjustments, and he moves around some of the robots. Okay. While he's doing that, are the robots conscious? No. However, we certainly can see the difference between the robots that he's manually, consciously overseeing during that 1 hour in that one building versus the other 9 buildings where he's not, right? So we wouldn't want to call those the conscious robots versus the unconscious robots, or the conscious factor and the unconscious factor, right? But if we did call it that, we could still, now that I built the scenario properly, we can understand what that would mean, but we'd probably want to come up with different words, right? But kind of like the consciously being overseen, I mean, it's more words, or the overseen building versus the non-overseen buildings, or the overseen robots versus the non-overseen robots, right? You see? So that's how it works with consciousness and your mind to some degree. It's not exactly parallel to some degree because you aren't a person with a body and so forth. You're conscious. You're like a conscious entity. But the part of your mind that you're conscious of, you're not even conscious fully of all of it, just like the overseer isn't even conscious of every aspect of each robot in that building. But he's aware in some sense of what's going on in that building, and he's involved with it, right? You don't manipulate your conscious mind, but you do some interaction with it. I actually think it's inhibited, and you can cause it to not like kind of move on. You can not rubber stamp, which forces your mind to open up what you're aware of, the part that you're aware of right there, or the part that you're overseeing. You're not aware of it, but the part of your mind, the part of the model of your mind, or your thoughts that you're currently consciously overseeing is inhibited. And your mind wants you to kind of rubber stamp things so it can move forward. But if you say, well, no, wait a second, you're telling me that I know that, but I don't, or that's certain, but it's arbitrary. So your mind makes the arbitrary seem real. I'm going pretty quickly here, but I'm just kind of giving you an overview here. So what we need to investigate and build and understand in order to have a sense of what's going on overall, and that's extraordinarily practical for your day-to-day life and your ultimate life and everything, is to generally be asking this question, okay, so there's our mind, it's not us. What's it generally doing by default? How does it operate in the sense of, practically speaking, that occur with my life? Like, I don't necessarily need to know how neurons work or neurotransmitters necessarily. I don't necessarily need to know what region of the brain lights up at this point. Maybe that'll help. Maybe that'll start to give me some questions to ask and some indications. But I do need to know in general how this works. Like the overseer would want to have a sense that, okay, there's 9 other buildings with robots that work by default. They generally do such and such, right? And then the part that I'm overseeing, the way it works is this way. And have some sense of how the whole thing works and how he or she interacts with the factory as a whole. Plus, you'd want to have a sense of what the factory is trying to produce and why, right? And then that would be important to understand how to interact with it too, right? So you want to have a sense of how your mind fits into the overall scheme of things with the environment and the world, and then you, right? Your experience of your conscious experience of goodness and stuff, or badness. So, and then we understand that there's a part of our mind that's involved that we're overseeing, that people mistakenly call that the conscious mind. None of what we're overseeing is conscious. It's all our mind, which is like a mechanism, which is like the robots, metaphorically. And then we want to have a sense of, well, what do we do consciously? What does overseeing mean? And what impact can it have? And how do I use that impact for the most benefit for myself and others by extension. So that's one way of looking at the overall question in life, or at least one very important aspect or part of the questions we need to ask about life and answer. And I have a pretty good idea of how it all works at this point, and I've given you a good amount of it, and I'll continue to over time. I'll close with the following. Your mind can only sees and operates and works on goals based on norms and standards. It has to have some default. What you want to do is have a way to think outside of norms and standards to figure out what the ideals would be, and then help your brain get into a place where it adjusts its own norms and standards, such as when someone joins OMG in order to make money, they don't just learn, which helps, but they also, I've designed OMG so it has a very strong impact on your norms and standards about making money and about effort with making money and all sorts of stuff, right? Or you get around Cotton for a few minutes and he doesn't think about making money. His mindset is different than a lot of people's, right? In a way that's helpful, right? And but his norms and standards are different. You get around him and your mind starts to move its norms and standards around, right? So what you need to do is think outside of norms and standards, like when I realized, wait a second, what we're trying to do in life is get to where there's no bad idea, and what leads to bad contradictions, contradictory ideas about stuff, about what's important. So that's outside of all norms and standards that I'm aware of. So we needed a way to get to that. Once you get to that, though, then you can start making it feel and seem more normal to your mind. So the way that you motivate or direct your mind is to first you want to figure out where you want to direct it. On its own, your mind is going to keep circularly. I'm saying something immensely important here. That to some degree I'm sure you guys are all bottlenecked by. On its own, your mind will keep coming to the conclusion that it should achieve or uphold, or make the world conform to its current norms and standards. On its own, your mind is going to tell you that it's you. So on your own, you're going to come to the conclusion without realizing it, and it's going to feel so right and so true that the world should be the way that you think the world should be. However and your mind absorbed those norms and standards throughout your current history, right, of life, in your growing up and now. Your mind's norms and standards can get adjusted without you doing it right by changes in the environment, right, by norms and standards being impacted by other people's norms and standards in the environment. As people do that, they think they're thinking outside the box, and they think they're making all sorts of changes, and their mind is making changes, but you're still limited to the norms and standards of other people, and it's still basically happenstance. The only way that you get real control over the situation, that you get outside of the tyranny of your own mind's norms and standards, is to be able to see in a way that's outside of norms and standards. To do that, you need to not try to have your mind be motivated outside of them. Your mind operates based on norms and standards. What you want to do is figure out ideal norms and standards and then get those programmed into your mind. And one of the other things you can do additionally is that you can have such clarity with certain ones that it doesn't matter if everyone else disagrees with you, that you can maintain them, which is interesting because incorrect norms and standards, even correct ones, but definitely incorrect ones and typically correct ones, in other people's minds are still arbitrary. Even if they happen to be right, they're still not anchored properly in other people's minds. And so when you see things properly, and I've talked about how to do this with mismatching and slowly building on what you can know by seeing things that have to be correct or that have to be incorrect. And I've illustrated this with property rights and all sorts of other stuff. Pretty much whenever I'm opening my mouth, I'm demonstrating the method of thinking outside of norms and standards by having a different way of looking, which can look to an innocent bystander like logic or something, but it's more than that. The consciousness field combined with keeping your concepts straight and so forth, and mismatching and such. I talk about it in alchemy. I talk about other places, and I'll talk about it more in the future. But one way or the other, you need to be able to guide your mind. Still does the thinking, but you need to guide it outside of just with ideals, not with other things, just not with goal achievement, but just with ideals, not outside of norms and standards into what's actually correct, right? And the individual property rights thing is an example because almost nobody believes in individual property rights by default. There was a guy that wrote about libertarianism that I read years ago that really had it pretty darn nailed. Maybe he really got it, and I read it, and I could tell that it was correct. Because the opposite had to be that we don't own any property. That just by a vote people can take away anything, which means there's no property. Then morally. So regarding money, your mind is going to keep ending up back at what your original norms and standards are unless you can think outside of it. So again, you're trapped in a box, and your mind is not going to tell you that you're trapped in a box. It's going to make it seem like just the right thing. Everything's right in the world. Except that, on the other hand, it won't, because you'll have this, something will still be off, but you won't know what it is. What you'll think, it'll keep telling you, you just don't have the right recipe yet, right? And Megan used herself as an example, so I'll use her as an example. And thank you, Megan. Is your mind is going to tell you that you need no, well, it's good because you did it right. You're trying to find something outside, but you don't know what, right? In your question, outside of what was going on, like what is it you're missing? But what is it you're missing? And the reason you keep not finding it is because you'll ask what you're missing, but your mind will keep bringing you back into these norms and standards. So you need a way out of that. And when I started to give you the wedge or the nuke to get outside of norms and standards, which is you can challenge anything in your mind by forcing it to show you where it's anchored. Like, well, what's the reason for that? What's the reason for that? And it'll get to nothing in many cases. And then you're like, well, okay, so now you have nothing. So then you have to be able to let go of it. In one sense, your mind won't right away let go of it. So you need to be able to feel it. You feel the norm and standard, but there's a way that you see that it's wrong. And it only needs to be like the smallest seed. You don't need to feel it. As a matter of fact, you won't. You feel your norms and standards. Your brain is motivated to go after its norms and standards. That's why what you need to do is figure out what's actually going to help you, what's actually going to have impact about what's important, what the ideals are going to be that make sense for real. Figure that out. Then you operate, the way that you achieve it is you operate on the norms and standards of your mind. You make it feel and seem normal to achieve that ideal, that ideal is what it should be. When you go to make a sale, you want to get to the point where it feels normal for the person to say yes. The more, and of course one way you achieve that is you get a bunch of yeses, but you need a way where you don't already have it before you can have it, right? That's why we need to not be able to measure results by results, because then you need to get results before you can get results. You're trapped. And you can say, oh, I try to break it down into bite-sized things, sure, but even better is you need to get to where, and you need to build this through actual understanding. You can't just say, okay, it's normal for them to say yes. That's not the right way to go about it. You have to build. So you have to build to where it actually makes sense. It's like chiseling a statue, right? You scrape away what's not supposed to be there until what's there reveals itself, right? It's one way of looking at making a sculpture. I'm not a sculptor, but they report that. But they carve away what shouldn't be there until the thinking man or Michael, David or whatever it is reveals itself, or whatever statue. So you chip away, you show how the opposite can't make sense. That's what I did with property rights. The opposite of property rights is ridiculous, and so individual property rights reveals itself. Instead, what people will do is make the argument about fairness, justice, like that we should all have the same amount of money, and use that, or the same amount of stuff. Or they'll say, well, it shouldn't be too unequal. Well, that's an example of arbitrary. If you keep on pulling on that, that makes no sense. Like if you say, for example, well, what if everyone has the same amount of money exactly, and then one person makes something and someone buys it from them? Now there's not equal. So do we take the money back? No, of course that doesn't make any sense, right? Or if we say, well, how much difference should there be between the richest person and the poorest person? And then it kind of dissolves into arbitrariness. There's no anchor there. Besides, money can always be created, right? There's more money can be created. It's not a scarce resource. It's not a static resource. If someone says, well, I want to make $10,000 a month, well, that might be arbitrary, and so you're not going to be very motivated by it. Some people might be, but others might not be, and a lot of people aren't motivated enough by that. You want to get to clarity that's where how it's tied into things that really motivate your mind. So you figure out an ideal, and then if you can tap the ideal into where your mind's already wired up, just by connecting it up, like I was able to do with laziness, because it's that motivates me to make lots of money. It takes millions of dollars to be lazy, right? At least one or two, right? Generally speaking, for the rest of your life. So that was easy. If you can't, then you might need to work on having different things that feel normal and right, how things should be, right? My mind feels like I should be able to be lazy, and so I was able to harness that. If you can't harness the way the norm and standard, the way how your mind thinks things should be. Some people think that they should always be achieving more and more and more. Well, or they should feel bad. Well, you can't work with that, right? You just want to find the correct thing, which would be that you want to keep getting rid of bad stuff in your life until it's gone, and then you can make more good stuff. But not that you should feel bad about, not achieving something every day. It's just like a treadmill. So you need something where you can get out. Okay. So if you just feel the importance, and I've already given answers to how this works in the past, but if you feel the importance and see how it fits together, with you embrace the idea that your brain is fully works based on this idea of standards and norms. It can't see without it. It can't understand goals without what should be. Your mind interprets goals as how things should be. Your mind is a goal-achieving mechanism, and it has to. The goal that it's after is its standard and norm. It needs to have some sense of that. But that's where whatever it takes is an example of, well, if it breaks you out of standards and norms that are unhelpful. Well, your brain's like, well, how much effort should I put in to achieving this thing? Well, you're just like, well, here's the real parameters, and you have to discover them, and within those, whatever it takes. Until you can get parameters within which it's whatever it takes, you should probably keep going, unless you can just easily achieve the goal, right? But if you're having difficulty, if something's wrong and you can't put your finger on it, then find parameters, find them. You can't just conjure them out of your butt. Find real ones, and I've given examples. I've talked about that earlier, right? Maybe you need a certain amount of time with your family, a certain amount of sleep, a certain amount of eating, and so forth. But besides that, and maybe you have a job that you have to upkeep to pay the bills. And then, all right, those are those you have to do. And then outside of that, I'm going to do whatever it takes. I've gone many years without TV, but I've even gone months without like video games sometimes when I had to do whatever it takes and outside of that. For me, that's like my, TV or entertainment or hobby, whatever. For other people, it's different. Strategy games, computer games. So get to wherever it takes. But you want to understand that your mind runs on norms and standards, and you embrace it. You don't fight against it, but you need to think outside of it to find the ideal. Then you think outside of norms and standards once again to get over, to create an environment, or get your mind, yourself, your body, your body and your brain are attached, and your mind's attached. So get yourself in an environment where it's going to feel as normal as possible to do what you're trying to do. Now, for me, what I work on with this stuff, I need to be alone, because there basically isn't a person that, maybe some of you guys, but like in my immediate vicinity, and even the way that I feel like about this stuff, it's fairly unique. Although again, I don't necessarily include you guys, but at least in my normal environment, I basically, just practically speaking, I spend a lot of time alone to work on this stuff because the minute I'm around someone else, they usually think that's not important. Oh, and a counterexample to that is sometimes talking to Mike, he feels like this is important at times or a lot. Just like me, I don't always think it's important either. By the way, that wasn't any kind of Mike's amazing, but I can't spend every moment of my life on this, and neither can he. But when it coincides, which is plenty, then we can talk about this. But still, there's a way that there's certain questions that I have that I haven't even. There's so much context. There's so many years I've been doing this that I have questions that even if it would feel important to someone after I explained it to him for a few hours, there's a good way for me to explain what I'm really getting at here, or not really, but with a small point. There's no one that's asking certain questions that I'm asking even you guys because you don't know what they are, because you need so much other context to get to them. So I need to be alone, because even if I was talking to one of you guys, you'd have other questions, but they're not the questions I might be working on. So in most cases, and of course any exceptions, great. My whole point of that is just that sometimes you might just need to be alone, practically speaking, because there's nobody that's going to share the particular norm and standard that you have right then. Like a question is a norm and standard. A question is something that like should be answered if it feels important, right? So norm, standards, and goals end up collapsing into the same type of thing. Are they exact synonyms? You don't have to worry about that right now, and I don't have a perfect answer that I can say in an instant. But they basically collapse into something very, very similar and intimately related. So excellent. Now you have an overall skeleton or a lot of flesh too of a model of what's going on with goals. Once you can think outside of standards and norms, once you can realize that you want to immerse your mind, and this is where the vision boards and so forth, this is where a lot of the law of attraction is so correct, and that's why it works so well, right? As long as it's what really gets implied to your mind. Because when you're, but as you're understanding standards and norms, you can really see what's all going on. And then you'll need to move your standards and norms over to where you feel like your ideal should be achieved, and whatever it takes. And if there's a real boundary with time, then there's a real boundary with time, such as someone else is going to do something in a certain time. But then the boundary is still only what it is. Like, let's say a person will give you some funding if you can have a prototype ready in 2 months. Then that doesn't mean you need to have the prototype in 2 months. It means you need to have the prototype in 2 months in order to get the funding. You don't want to confuse the two. So you might go for that, of course, to get the funding, but the funding isn't necessary for you to achieve your goal ultimately. And if it is, then for 2 months you do what you can do to make it, and if you don't, then you drop it. Right? If the funding is the end-all be-all, then you don't get it and you move along. But your life isn't dependent on it, because ultimately you have to understand things are rigged for you to be happy. So if there's anything you can't achieve, then you don't need to achieve it. Right? That solves that issue. So if there's a real time pressure, then fine. Otherwise, you don't need time pressures, because when you do whatever it takes, then you do whatever it takes. It's a priority within whatever boundaries, so you're still totally focused. The time pressure just confuses the issue. Okay, that is that for now. I'm going to have to wrap up here. I said I'd have discussion. I had some in the beginning, but not as much. I feel like I'm being categorized as being an older woman. Maybe people don't think, they expect a certain thing. Maybe you do have a smaller pool of people that could say yes, but then you have to find that pool, right? I mean, when I teach my stuff, I'm categorized as all sorts of stuff that I'm not, or even that I am, right? But then you have to find people where that's not an absolute deal breaker, and there's probably plenty. But then you also have to think, well, what is it about being an older woman that sets off signals? It's probably correlated, but there might be ways to overcome it, right? This is one of the difficult things that Black people in America might have to deal with. I'm not all-knowing about this stuff, but it's probably the case that they come in, and this is one of the real things that they probably deal with. I'm not saying that should be the case. Of course, this would be better not to be the case. But to some degree, it's the case that some amount of people, it's like one strike against them. It's easier, and so then they're better off dressing in a way that overcomes that. But someone who, especially if they're young, black, right, and a man, right, then they have certain things where certain people are going to um, potentially categorize them, but the minute they dress and carry themselves with a certain posture, a certain aura, boom, it's gone. Doesn't affect them at all. Or with at least a lot more people, it doesn't affect them at all. But then if they dress in a certain way that triggers those things, then it's working against them realistically, right? Should it be different? Of course. Is it maybe fully different already and I don't know it? Maybe, right? So any of the wrong ways to interpret that, give me the benefit of the doubt. But definitely in real life, strategically, if I was black, I would pay even more attention to how I dress and carry myself. Being white is one of the things that probably is easier on me. I don't have to go to quite so many steps. So being an older woman, it would be potentially similar. There's things you have to watch out. Just like if you're a hottie, right, and you're in your low 20s, that would be a problem too, right? And so you have to take extra steps, right? You dress like Hillary Clinton, get the pantsuits ready, right? You might have to take extra steps, or you might try to turn it to your advantage in other ways. But you'll work with where you're at. Anyone can have their own advantages or disadvantages, right? Men have all sorts of disadvantages of their own, and they have all sorts of advantages, right? Different races have different advantages in different places. There's places that a black person could go and be accepted that I couldn't go and be accepted. So that might be to their advantage. Maybe they could turn that to their advantage. Maybe there's less of a pool of those people versus what I have. Maybe there isn't, right? But I'm willing. Again, I'm willing to buy into the idea that certain people have overall net more things against them, right? Just like someone who's handicapped might have more things against them, but then it might be in their favor a bit. I don't think it all balances out, right? Necessarily. But then we have what we have, and we work with what we have. So that, and I just did that to give a little bit of a thought process on various things. Okay. Okay, I'm gonna probably have to wrap up soon here. So that is that. Um, yeah, exactly. I think this can really be a helpful thing, Faith. Excellent. Julie said, "Well, I love that. The standard to get the result is whatever it takes." Yeah, that it's a big hand. Probably a lot of light bulbs from that idea about that at some point there's something where you should get the result. When you're an entrepreneur, you have to get fully outside that type of thinking, and it can be hard. The more that you've been in academia and the more you've been in like kind of government supervised work, right? Or been an employee, which is different than being like the more you've been in kind of an artificial environment where you do certain stuff and then you're entitled to your paycheck, you're entitled to your salary, you're entitled to not getting fired, then the harder it is to think like an entrepreneur. By default, the more like the harder it would be to guess to think that way, to realize outside of that norm or standard. But of course, I pointed out directly here, so that can help you break out. But then you still want to surround your mind with, which means just yourself, right? With people who can think that way also, or just pictures or sayings, or watch your own internal dialogue, what you're reinforcing with standards and norms. Jennifer said, "This concept has really been helping me persevere and keep building with patience and the perspective of increasing understanding, so I will get where I'm going. There's a certain way to not get there is to jump to another shiny object." Right. It's often not the recipe. Here, there's a little rule of thumb I had a thought about during this week, which is, and this is of course just a rule of thumb, but if you try kind of like 3 different recipes, like 3 different pickup lines, then probably it's not the pickup line. It's probably something besides that, and it might not be you as a whole. It might be some other thing that you're doing, or maybe it's that it's not about pickup lines, right? It's that it's about what you do after that, or what you say after that. Or hanging at a shingle, right? The cold calling isn't going to do it. But anyway, if you try 3 different like kind of tactics, like it's okay to try a couple different shiny objects in the sense of trying a few different recipes. Like if you try to make a lemon meringue pie, it doesn't turn out well. It might not be something wrong with you. Maybe you could try a different recipe. But if you try 3 different recipes for lemon meringue pie, and none of them are tasty, then there's probably something greater that you're missing about cooking, right? If you try 3 different that's why within OMG I gave you people a few different recipes, because you really could have most everything basically right, but certain recipes will just not apply to you and some will, right? Without having to like have a whole bunch of deeper self-improvement necessarily to make some money. You still want the stuff I'm talking about no matter what for the rest of it, for the greater context of your life. But obviously people don't need what I'm talking about just to make money, or else no one would make money outside of my training, which isn't the case. But anyway, that's a cool rule of thumb, right? It's not that if the recipe doesn't work, it must be something deeper. Try a few different recipes, right? Like kind of tactics or whatever within. It's kind of like if I'm trying to fix something on a computer, I might Google the error, and then I'll try 3 different sets of instructions that I might find on different websites. If I try like 3 or 4 or 5, try the ones that are there and nothing's working, then it might be something that I can't just find that kind of instructions for, perhaps, right? But I will try a few different recipes before deciding that it's something deeper. But at the same time, at some point, you stop trying different recipes, right? You stop, if you date the 10th person doesn't work out at all, then, or even if it works out for a while and doesn't work out, then there's something greater that you're missing, or even the 4th, right? And then you try fixing that deeper thing, and then try a few, and then if it's not working, then look for something deeper again. And that's a pretty good way to deal, kind of eyeballing it, because we have to have some way to operate. Like we don't know it all right now. So so we need kind of some heuristics that are pretty good, and that's a good one. So, it's actually a pretty very good one. Maria said, I love the concept. Oh, this is from an hour. All this stuff is from an hour ago. Didn't get refreshed. I love the concept of not focusing on results and just finding balance, boundaries, and going to any length. See, it's a very powerful concept. Very much, and I definitely do it. Yeah. Yeah, the straight line from Jordan Belfort. Yeah. Okay, I'm going to have to wrap things up here. I don't know if I can. It'll depend on what Liz is doing next Thursday, and which depends on a different thing, whether she gets better. So if Liz gets healthy, then I won't might have Thursday open, because then she'll be traveling on the next Tuesday and do her thing on the Thursday. But I'll try to do at least one more Q&A session soon, and then anyway we'll kind of play it by ear. But I'm pretty happy with the overview that I got to give to you today on things. Okay, but I'll have to end things here. Keep things to about 2 hours for this rigging the game. And all right, I'll just scroll down to the end here. Right, exactly. Being a black woman, right? You just have to learn there's some extra things that you might have to do to not get put. It's interesting to note that people say, like, people are being targeted for like people be shot because they're black. Interesting. It's a few different. It's black, young black male, right? That get shot, if at all. Sorry. Let's bypass and arguing about whether or not you're more likely to get shot by police if you're a young black male. But you still have to be a young black male to fit in that category, right? So there's a few things together, and then if you identify some of those things, then if it's reality, then we would like to change the reality. But if you're navigating within it, then of course you want to not set off those signals. But you don't want to like rebel against the reality. Or if you do, you want to understand the risks you're taking. If that makes sense. Like if you're a young black male and you want to walk around wearing a hoodie, like I wear a thing with a hoodie sometimes, right? But I'm aware, and sometimes I talk on the phone at night in my neighborhood, and it's part of how I help to understand different perspectives and minorities and genders and so forth. And I think, wow, if I were black, also being a male, and I'm not young, but I'm not old, I'm still in the age range, then I could freak people out. And it should, again, it would be not ideal. I don't want that to be the case. I don't think it should be the case. More likely. Although I have been stopped by police being white and doing the same thing, talking, going around at night, walking around at night, kind of at odd hours and where I live now. But the other interesting thing is that if I was black, I'd also have to wonder if it was because I was black, and I have the luxury of not having to wonder about that, being white. So it's another little benefit versus being black. That, of course, ideally wouldn't be there. When I talk about a benefit, I'm not looking to accumulate benefits being white. I'm looking to understand how it's like being other people, and so forth. Cool. I missed the beginning. Am I going to be ending it? No, I said I might take some time before continuing too much more with the series, but we'll see. And I don't mean to on purpose be mysterious or whatever. I just want to kind of keep things open. But I won't. Not never going to like go away permanently or whatever. I always feel relaxed after listening to what you have to say, David. It really helps me be calm and focused, knowing that since I'm building my understanding, I'm making progress. This definitely clarified some things. Wonderful. I'm so glad. Great motivator. You're very welcome, guys. Very welcome. Yeah, I like how this all turned out. How it came together. I wasn't sure how it would all come together, as often happens, but I like how this particular webinar came together. Okay, guys, take care, and I will talk to you sometime soon. And this one will bear, I helped us reap some stuff, but I sowed some seeds here. I gave kind of a good skeletal framework of some things that you can really see how to develop for yourself more too. So there's a lot in this one that can help you even for like, and it was pretty obvious what it would be, with my kind of overview there. You delve into that, and it'll really put you on the right track with a number of things.